This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com. And today, as a guest, I have a guy that you may have seen clips of on this channel. He has a new podcast on the Unleashed TV YouTube channel with Dan the Beast Severn. This is Dan Severn's second podcast that he's going to be doing above the one with Don Fry, the toxic masculinity one. Eric Carrol, who just got back from Texas. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing all right, man. How about you?
Good. Just had a good workout. How's Bad Street USA treating you over there in Atlanta?
It's okay, man. I try to stay away from Atlanta, to be honest with you, but it's not too bad. I'm on the outskirts.
Okay, I was in Deep South Wrestling for about a month in McDonough, and the outskirts seem pretty nice.
Yeah, it's according to what part of Atlanta you go to. You know, it's just like any other big city. You got all the different parts, but McDonough is not too bad, and I've been there several times. That's on the south side.
Yeah, and I see now the Nightmare Factory is actually based in McDonough. Is there any reason for that? Does someone actually live there that's connected with the Nightmare Factory?
I'm not familiar with that, man.
Yeah, now I guess QT Marshall is back with AEW from what I hear, so maybe it will still have an affiliation with AEW. I guess his singles career that he was quitting to go after didn't work out too well for him.
Oh, you're talking about the training center with Cody Rhodes and a few of the guys.
Yeah,
Okay, I have seen something on that. Yeah, I have.
I think Billy Gunn is involved with it too.
Oh, okay, that's awesome, man. I'll have to go check that out.
Dustin Rhodes too. I mean, what's funny is they recently did a uh, a show in Quebec City, an AEW show that Dustin Rhodes was on, and they didn't even put Dustin in the advertising, which I would think he's one of the more known guys in AEW.
You would definitely think so. He's been around for a long time.
So are you from the Atlanta area? I know you're a big fan of the Von Erichs. You're a big fan of Dan Severn. Where's your fandom based from?
Columbus, Georgia. I am down by, I guess, one of the more well-known guys that live in the same city is Marty Jannetty. So, yeah, I've lived here pretty much my whole life, man, but I've been all over the United States, but this is where I like to call home.
I have to agree with this fan's comment that you look kind of like Primo Cologne.
Oh, yeah?
Have you ever got that before? I have wrestled him
No,
a few times too.
I don't even know who he is.
Eddie Cologne, Carlos Cologne's, he was in WWE for a while.
Oh, no,
Carlos
no.
Cologne's other son.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's Carlito's brother?
yeah.
Okay. No, but I'll definitely check it out.
He had a very forgettable career.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
But
that's
he was famous in Puerto Rico, and I think he runs. I don't think WWC runs regularly anymore, but I think he took over from Carlos running it now.
oh, okay. That's cool, man.
Sean wants to know if you watch Marty Jannetty's podcast.
I have seen a few of them. I talked to Marty just a couple of weeks ago. He's definitely a character, man.
He's one of my most popular guests. He's a great guy. Any chance of having him on Unleashed TV anytime soon?
You know, I haven't talked to him about it, but I definitely want to. I know right now, man, his foot's probably the worst I've ever seen. Um, but I mean, I think I did see some pictures of it recently. It looks like it's getting a little bit better, but yeah, man, I would love to get Marty on here.
I heard there was talk that it was going to be amputated recently.
Yeah, he put it on Facebook probably a little over a month ago that they was talking about it, which I will tell you, being from Columbus, Georgia, his doctor is one of the best orthopedic doctors in the country. He's amazing, Dr. McCluskey. So if he's saying it's got to go there, you know, I would trust him, but hopefully not. I know that's got to be painful for the guy, man.
So I can tell I've seen all the Unleashed TV episodes now. I've watched them all. I think Kevin Von Erich might be your best one and most viewed one at this point too, even though it's the newest posted. How did you get Dan to do this second podcast? What's your history with him? What's the story of how it started?
So, man, I've been doing a podcast for like the past 4 years that talks about the challenges men are going through in divorce, men's suicide, especially just like there's a lot of challenges facing us, man, and it can be really heavy. I've had to deal with men getting murdered, kids being murdered, you name it. And it just got to a point it was getting really, really dark. And me and Dan were good friends. And I was talking about trying to help out with the Toxic Masculinity podcast with him. And then I don't know really how it came to fruition. We got to talking about it one day. It was like, man, let's start a podcast. It would be nice to do something outside of what I'm normally doing because I'm a huge wrestling fan. Always have been. I listen to all the podcasts and never got to chime in myself. So this is kind of like a passion project, something to have fun with. And it's been pretty cool, man. We're just starting out, but I think we got something going on here.
Now, I can tell Dan's given his opinion here and there, but it's definitely much different than the Toxic Masculinity podcast, which is very political and very about getting their views on stuff across to the people. How would you say that the two podcasts are different? And also, any plans to get Don Fry on your podcast?
Oh man, I would love to. I think me and Dan had talked about that before. They had me on Toxic Masculinity at one point in time. But yeah, it's not supposed to be just a pro wrestling podcast. So we're going to be having on different people as well. We've had on a couple of the UFC guys. So I'm not too sure where all it will go to. Just so far, when we started off the show, we had so many pro wrestlers say they wanted to do the show. And it's like living a dream come true for me, man. Being from here, when I was younger, Dan Severn was my favorite UFC fighter. He was the first UFC fighter that I watched. And from that point on, he was like one of my childhood heroes. So to be on the screen with him and a Kevin Von Erich, two of my heroes, man, it's freaking amazing.
Yeah, and I noticed what you're very good. You know a lot about wrestling. You're good at asking questions. I watch a lot of wrestling podcasts, and you have potential because you ask also the hard hitting questions. But I think it's nice that you have Dan Severn because I don't think you could get away with asking some of those questions if you didn't have him there. So I think it gives you the advantage. And as I told you too, I liked that in some of these podcasts with the hosts and the wrestler who doesn't know much about the guests will try and ask all the questions, but Dan lets you ask the questions.
Yeah, it was one of the things me and Dan talked about early on. Dude, when he wasn't fighting with the UFC, then he was wrestling with WWE or the NWA. So he was on the road all the time. So to know all the stories, I mean, I was the guy sitting at home and soaking in all these stories. So he's like, man, just start talking. I want to hear the stories. And as I hear, I'll get in and give my 2 cents. I think it's got a really good chemistry to it, man. And I mean, for anybody that hasn't met Dan Severn, to be that badass that you saw in the ring growing up, man, he's just one of the coolest laid back guys, man. So yeah, it's been really cool.
I would put Dan in the top 5 nicest wrestlers I've ever met. I would say MMA fighters in general are nicer than wrestlers, but
Oh,
Dan
really?
is definitely. Yeah, wrestlers I find are very greedy and very workerish. There are some nice ones where MMA fighters, I guess because they're not workers, they don't ask for as much. Where wrestlers always seem to want more and more and more, whatever they can get out of you. Where MMA fighters seem to just appreciate what they're given, I find in my dealings. But Dan's a great guy.
Absolutely. I'm curious, Hannibal, do you think that was more of the old generation that was acting like that, or is the new generation like that as well?
I don't deal with as many of the new generation on my channel because I find that they don't do as well as the older generation, and I don't watch the new stuff as well. But I would probably say more likely than not that the old generation are probably more that way, and also because they aren't as spoiled as the new generation. The new generation, a lot of them don't have to work as hard for what they have because in the old days they would take the top guys from all the territories. They would have been doing the territory system for years, whereas a lot of these new generation people from NXT, for example, have been getting paid for training. So I mean, they're not used to having to like work people for their money.
Well, that's what that was pretty much what I was figuring. I just wanted to hear you say it because it's definitely a completely different business altogether.
Yeah, and I'll have to ask you your opinion on this, but do you think they even need as big of a development system now that they have AEW, TNA, NWA, MLW? When they first created the development territories, is because they had pretty much bought out WCW and ECW, and there was nowhere to pick from. Do you think they need to develop as many wrestlers from scratch now?
Mm, I don't think they have to, but I think they want to. WWE wants to own that product, that character, and take credit for it. I mean, that's just my opinion, but it's definitely a different scene. It's an exciting time to be a wrestling fan. I mean, 15 years ago, it was looking kind of bleak. Now we've got AEW, we had TNA back then, but it just seems like all these different organizations are coming together, and it's been an exciting time for wrestling for sure. I still don't watch much of the new product, to be honest with you, because the old product is where my heart is. But yeah, man, I don't think they need it, but they want it.
And speaking of the old product, you just did the interview I mentioned with Kevin Von Erich. Very good interview. That I've seen pretty much all of Kevin's interviews, and that's definitely the best interview I've seen of him. He really opened up. But you also went to see his show on the weekend. I believe it was in Fort Worth. You actually drove, I think you said 13 hours or something from Atlanta to Dallas to meet Kevin. How was that show with him? Could you give us the details? Who hosted it? What did
Yeah,
he talk about?
yeah, man. So you know, wrestling was a family thing for me. I was the youngest of the family, and my brother was 10 years older than me. I was born in 84. David died in early 84. So the Von Erichs really wasn't my generation, but I lived through it because of my brother. That was his heroes growing up. So me and my brother both went out there, and it was a dream come true for the both of us. When we got there, the place was packed, seeing how passionate you're talking about like 30 years plus that world class has been gone. If they started world class back up right now, I mean, the Texas uh, area would be completely set on fire, dude. They still love their Von Erichs. It's Von Erich country. There was a local broadcaster named Dell Hansen that was there. I'd never heard of him before. He did an amazing job asking questions, but he was joined by David Manning, who came out there, and of course Kevin. And I think one of the things he's wanting to do with these shows, one is to connect with his fans. I saw some stuff there that Kevin did for the fans. Like there was this one guy that brought his mom's urn. And he was emotional. He was like, "Man, you were her favorite wrestler. You meant so much to her. Will you please just touch her urn?" It's kind of a weird request, but Kevin went and got, down off stage, goes and gives this guy a hug. And he touches the mom's urn. He actually signed it because the guy wanted him to sign it. And just some of the other things I saw, it was amazing. But with this movie coming out, I think there was a lot of misconceptions out there. Over the years, you had 5 brothers that passed away, but there was other things that wasn't in the movie and things I had never heard before that if they would actually talk to Kevin, because they didn't consult with him, they would have found out a lot different stuff. The way that it actually went down, and this wasn't just from Kevin's mouth, from David Manning and a lot of people there saying, this isn't the way it went down. If you had talked to us, we would have gave you the real story. And I believe the guy obviously did a lot of homework because there was little bits and pieces of every interview that I've watched of Kevin over the years inside of that movie, but I don't think he put the pieces of the puzzle exactly right the way it should be in there. And it made it look, in my opinion, as I was watching it, I do this with dad talk and I see how people demonize men and fathers. That's what it looked like, was a portrayal of Fritz, the big bad toxic masculinity dad that pushed his boys into the business and made them kill themselves. So I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing Kevin doing this is Kevin loved his dad. That's very evident. And if you ever hear him speak, yes, I'm sure Fritz had his problems, but at the same time, man, I mean, we all make our mistakes. It seemed like this guy went through not the death of just one child, but 5 children. We can't imagine how hard that was for him. Yes, he was that big, rough, tough Texas dad, but still, what would that do to your mental health? So I'm glad to see that Kevin's doing that, but I know that's got to be extremely hard for him too, because you're talking about this really big family, but yet you're the only one left to do it. And over the years, wrestlers, they've all got their stories, they've all got the things that they're going to say, and you're the only one there left to defend it. So, but I thought it was pretty cool, man. He packed the house out. He came out barefooted to Stranglehold by Ted Nugent, and it was just a good time to be a fan.
He seems like a great guy, and I truly have all the respect in the world from him. One thing in the movie, and he did even contradict this in your interview with him, where he talks about being kind of a ladies' man, because he actually met his wife or something. I think he talked about in your interview.
Yeah.
Then was single for a while in college, then got back with his wife. In the movie, they pretend like his wife was the only one that he was ever with, and took his virginity and everything. And they seem to make him as like the one that never did anything. But from what I understand from talking to guys like Jerry Jarrett and Al Perez and Sid, he was actually a partier at one point too, but he definitely overcame it. Do you think they kind of presented him as like this pure guy in the movie just because that's the way the movie
I'm,
wanted to
I'm,
go?
yeah, probably so. I mean, let's be honest, Hannibal. I mean, it was the 80s. Those boys were like Elvis Presley in that Dallas Fort Worth area. I mean, they probably could have got just about any woman they want. I mean, I got some stories. I don't know if I could tell, but the lady behind us was 72 years old. And, you know, she was screaming, wanting Kevin to sign her chest. I mean, but we laughed about that all night long. But I mean, there were still women in there going crazy over these boys. I know that they made his wife look like kind of like a ring rat that was just sitting out there. She was a fan, a groupie that was trying to get with him. And I knew better, because I wish they would have talked to him, because I believe in the long run, that was probably, you know, Kevin's rock. That was probably who kept him going, man. She was beside him through the death of all 5 of his brothers, his dad, his mom, and helped him build that beautiful family. So, I mean, when you get into personal details like that, I'm sure if he would have made a telephone call that he would have got it. But to answer your question, I went completely off topic. Yes, it was the 80s. Those boys were famous, could probably have whatever they wanted. And it was the era of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So I'm sure they definitely got into things they shouldn't have. But I am nobody to say anything about that, because I definitely did that myself. And we've all made our mistakes.
Yeah, and I'm nobody to say anything about that either by a long shot. But the one interesting thing is, you mentioned that they made her look like a groupie standing outside. One thing that like they portrayed in the movie that never would have happened in the 80s would be like the Von Erichs just be able to stand outside, because you could see when they were coming out, they were just mobbed by
Mobs.
women trying to just grab at them like they were the Beatles. And Kevin talks about it in that podcast. Sometimes he was actually afraid, and they had to get police to protect him. So it's not like in the peak of their popularity they could just stand outside the sportatorium and hang out with fans.
No, one of the funniest parts of that was him talking about Carrie. Carrie used to put like a burqa or something on and make himself look like an Arab. He said he got away with it for a while, but eventually the fans caught on. I mean, it definitely was Beatlemania, Elvis Presley like. When they went to the ring, they were clawing at the boys, they were tearing their shirt off. They wanted nothing more than to just get to him. And I'm, again, over 30 years, man. And when I was in that auditorium the other night, them people are still going crazy for the Von Erich. So I'm sure that had to be a special time there in the DFW area. I mean, and then to hear just how big they were over in Israel. You know, Kevin's met the president several times. He just got back from Israel. They were big all over the world. They were getting higher ratings in New York than Vince was back in the 80s. I honestly believe that the brothers, you know, had this not happened, we would probably have a completely different scene in pro wrestling right now.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you talk about Texas, it could be a territory still. I mean, I was part of SWE Fury that during the pandemic, it was really popular. It probably had Iran, Texas, and if not for bad management decisions, I mean, they would still be around. And it could have actually been been a territory, I believe, just through the popularity of it. Do you think places like Texas could actually sustain just from population size? And it, what did they say? Texas wrestling is on fire. Used to be the saying during the pandemic. Like it seems like it's still on fire there. San Antonio has had 6 sellouts in a row for
Yeah.
Raw. I mean, that's crazy.
I mean, dude, it's the hotbed. I mean, you've got so many big places: Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston, Galveston. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It was a perfect place to have a territory, which I know back then it was pretty much you had two famous families down there. You had the Von Erichs and you had the Funks. So if somebody could get back in and get that traditional wrestling there, I believe people are actually, they're desiring that right now. Don't get me wrong. I love seeing some of the new wrestlers, but it seems like it's just about the high spots. It reminds me of when I was a kid watching somebody jump off the diving board, who's going to do the next big move. When it comes to the storylines, and one of the things I loved about World Class was when you saw the people that would come out to the ring. Yeah, you had Dingo Warrior, Kerry Von Erich, you had your bodybuilders, but they had just regular, everyday looking guys. It had that real feel to it, and it's something that is missing in modern professional wrestling, and this is probably the reason why I just can't pay attention to it. But Texas, yes, Texas is a hotbed. I love it. I'm down here because I've still got my mom alive and my in-laws and stuff. But if something happened, man, I might even think about going out there myself. That's how much I like it.
Yeah, I other than the police speed traps there,
Yeah.
I,
You're
I
okay.
actually like Texas.
You're okay on the highway. It's
Yeah.
don't speed in the small towns. They'll let you go 100 on the highway, but if you go 5 over in the small towns or the back roads, they're going to get you.
The police are very strict there. They actually stopped me and made me sit on the side of the road for 20 minutes and called backup for me walking with a hood on, looking suspicious. They let me go because I was doing nothing, but like you don't want to be a troublemaker in Texas at all. Those rangers take their job very seriously.
We don't take kindly to your kind around here.
Yeah,
I haven't seen that, but I could see it. Yeah, I
exactly. There, I did. By the way, I did love Walker Texas Ranger too. Maybe that's why I have a soft spot for Texas. That'd be awesome if you could get him on Dan's show.
Dude, I've tried. I mean, I even tried that with Dad Talk because I don't know if anybody's heard this. Just like I think it was a couple years ago, Chuck found out he had another daughter. She showed up to his house and was like, I think you're my dad. And from what I read, he was like, look, I would like to look into this further to make sure. But they said at that moment, he wrapped his arms around her and gave her a hug and said, I'd like to know you too. Come in. And I've read the story. It was really, really cool, man. But Chuck, I think he's in his late 80s, isn't he?
Yeah, for sure. And thinking about that, that's the opposite of Tito Santana, who actually has a daughter, and it was confirmed by blood test. And she has wrestled in Texas before. She's a world champion in judo, and he's like, "Get away from me! I don't want
Really?
anything to do with you." Yeah, Jenny Santana, very nice girl too.
Oh,
Kind of
man,
the
I hate to
opposite
hear
of
that.
Chuck seems like he's a genuine person. Kevin Von Erich seems like that way, and Dan seems like that way. You can tell with some wrestlers, especially baby faces, they'll act nice, but they're really more heel in real life. But there are some genuine ones out there.
Dan surprised me more than anybody, man. He just seems like the goofy, fun-loving guy that goes around doing dad jokes all the time. it's, uh, it's completely different than I thought he would be in real life.
Yeah, and speaking of, you're mentioning that Kevin Von Erich's wife was his rock. I mean, transforming into your other podcast, but I've had a horrible time since my divorce 2 years ago. But I've actually noticed, like in wrestling, the wrestlers who have had long-term success, especially from the 80s. I'm not talking about now, as you said, it's a
Right.
different generation, but
Right.
from the 80s and 90s, the ones that have been successful in real life have often had great wives behind them that have managed their money and like just kept them grounded. Have you noticed that too from your research?
Yeah, man, from what I can see, how hard must it have been to have a spouse back then when you're on the road all the time? As far as being successful because of having a, good wife. I don't know how you would say that about Ric Flair. And Rick, I love you. That was just a little joke right there. I think he's had like 6 wives. I think he laughs about that himself.
Six wives, but he hasn't been successful in real life. His son died. I
Yeah.
mean, he's still having to work. I know he loves it, but like, let's face the fact, he drinks all the time, even when he's not supposed to drink anymore. I mean, he's living the Ric Flair life, but a lot of people wouldn't consider that a personal success, even though he's had an amazing career.
Would you think that's just not being able to separate himself from the gimmick?
I think so, yes. And then one thing about AEW that I'm just shocked by is that they have Ric Flair and they don't promote him when he's going to appear. Like in Charlotte, they didn't even advertise he's going to appear. Then he appears.
They
And like
didn't
they
promote
recently
him in
came to
Charlotte.
Canada, didn't do well, and like Flair would have drawn here. It's bizarre.
They had him in Charlotte and didn't promote.
They also didn't promote it with Sting's last appearance in Charlotte. They just like put him on the show, yeah. And they had like 3,000 people. This was Ric Flair's first appearance for a TV company in Charlotte since WWE. So it was bizarre.
That's nuts, man. I went 15 years ago. Flair did a signing at a Walmart, just some random Walmart in South Carolina, and the line was a mile long. So, I mean, if you don't promote, then people don't know it's there. You could have Metallica playing at the venue down the street tonight, and if you don't tell people, it's going to be empty. It's one thing to have the talent, but let people know what's going on. And as well as I do, Hannibal, people that can draw a house like that, those names, there's not many of them left. So, I mean, it would bring me to an event if I could see some of the older generation. That would be the one thing that make me go there. So, AEW, I would probably start utilizing that if I was you. I'm sure it's not cheap to have the guy there.
It's almost like they're ashamed to have him. So when they use him, it'll just be for a quick appearance, unadvertised here or there, or like that promo. Which I mean, the guy's in his 70s now. I mean, let's face it, he doesn't look that great. Remember, he said, "Any girl from 18 to 34 or whatever, come back to my hotel," and like they cut that out. It's like that's just a wrestling saying. Stop taking it so seriously.
Did you see the episode of Flair on Kill Tony?
No,
Uh,
no, I never even heard about it. What happened?
uh, it was pretty embarrassing. Tony Hinchcliffe, a good friend of Joe Rogan's, he's a very big pro wrestling guy. Anytime Rogan has on a pro wrestler, Tony has got to be on there. But he has this show for amateur comedians where they get like 60 seconds a piece to go on the show, and you either do really well or you just tank. And a lot of people tank. It's bad. Well, Flair went on there, and I think he was bragging about already having 15, 16 beers before he got there. And the whole meaning of the show is to roast the people coming on. And I don't know if you guys saw Ric Flair's roast, but even then he thought people were actually making fun of him and he didn't know how to take it. Well, same thing happened on that show. About 2 or 3 guys in, Flair just started talking about his son that died and said, "You can't make fun of people or I'm going to walk off the stage." And at the end of the day, that's what he did. He walked off the stage, and it was very, very awkward. I feel sorry for Tony Hinchcliffe because that was the whole reason he was supposed to be on the show and he didn't get it.
Yeah, I think I may have heard about it now that you bring it up, but I never actually saw it. Now, as far as Dan Severn, by the way, guys, if you go to Unleashed TV, I did a podcast with Dan, and you could see that on the Unleashed TV YouTube channel. As far as his career, what would be your favorite UFC fight of his, and what would be your favorite pro wrestling match of his?
Oh man. Right off, I'd have to say his first fight, Anthony Macias, when he did those suplexes. I remember watching that as a kid, and I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. I mean, he literally folded that guy up like a pretzel. And Dan had told me in later years, he's like, I did that on purpose. I knew everybody was going to be watching. But that will always be the moment that will stick out the most to me. And knowing that Dan was, right before turning 37 when he had his first UFC match, most of those guys would be retired by then. But Dan not only started then, but he had 121, I want to say, matches. He's number 2 for the most mixed martial arts fights of all time. There's one guy ahead of him that's named Shannon Rich. Dan Severn is number 2. I think out of 121, he won 109. And the dude is one of the only ones I've met, even with pro wrestlers, that doesn't have cauliflower ear. So as far as Dan and his wrestling, man, I don't think that they utilized him the way they should. I've heard Cornette talk about it, and I think Cornette was spot on. They're always trying to get this mouthpiece or this guy that can talk and do the promos. You didn't have to do that with Dan. He could beat people's ass, man. You didn't have to do that. Let him have, the sweaty shirt, walk down to the ring with the mustache and that I'm going to whip your ass look. And you've got one of the most legitimate wrestlers that ever stepped into the ring. So I don't have very good WWF or NWA moments because I feel like they shit the bed when it came to Dan Severn. I think a lot of people did.
One reason I think they didn't give Dan the full push is because they love to control people, and he had that contract where he could still do seminars, do outside wrestling bookings, and I think he could even do MMA here and there. And I think they saw that as, oh, we don't have full control of him. We're not going to give him that Ultimate Warrior push. That's the only thing I can think of because. I mean, even Severn versus Shamrock, if it happened, I don't remember it, but it seems like that would have been the ultimate draw back in those days. And I can't even remember one match I remember the Brawl for All with Dan. That's about all I remember.
I remember one with D'Lo Brown, and I know about the Owen Hart thing where, Owen Powell drived him and he got really hurt. But outside of that, that's what I'm saying, man. One of the most legit pro wrestlers, amateur wrestlers of all time, and you can't find anywhere to make them fit. I guarantee you it had a lot to do with, Dan already had the Beast name in the UFC as well. That's one of the reasons I think, going back to some of your earlier questions, why are they still keeping like this developmental training facilities and stuff like that? They want to get you through there. They want to make you do the WWE way, but they want to own that name so that they can get bigger cuts of the merchandise. And they want to say they was created by them. I don't see any other reason behind it. Could be wrong, but yeah, because they couldn't get Dan's name, I think that would probably have a lot to do with it. But it's just a shame, man. It really is a shame because the guy had everything you could need.
And he's not in the WWE Hall of Fame, even though he's the only wrestler that actually wore the NWA title in the octagon. I mean, I guess the Bellas are more important to history than Dan for going in first.
Way before Brock Lesnar. Let's be honest. I mean, Lesnar wasn't like a huge mouthpiece either. So, I mean, they did really, if they would have done with Dan what they did with Brock, there's no telling where Dan would have been, but he definitely deserves to be inside of the Hall of Fame. How many legit fighters would have wore the pro wrestling belt inside of the UFC octagon too? That was a very, very big thing for Dan to do to give legitimacy over to the NWA, I think. But I don't know.
I think he's one of the most brave people I've ever met, just because you talk about all the MMA fights he had. He didn't even have training camps for these fights. Like, he's on the road. He's just looking at his book. Oh, it's an MMA fight tonight, wrestling match tomorrow. I guess I'll go and I'll fight MMA. And he didn't even want to pay quarter bid.
He didn't have either of his ACLs either, Hannibal.
Yeah.
Neither of his ACLs.
Who does that? I'll just grab a random person to be in my corner. I'm just going to go in there and just fight and not even think twice about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's damn for you. And you know what, dude? I think that's a little chip on his shoulder sometimes, because even like with the Royce Gracie fight, I think Dan would have annihilated Royce, and he was definitely close to it. He didn't have a proper training camp. And look how far he went without it. Could you imagine if he would have came in his prime with the training camps that today's people do? There's a lot of people that say the older generation couldn't last in today's MMA. When you're talking about like a Hoist Gracie or something like that, I think that's true because, you know, people know Brazilian jiu-jitsu and it's became a part of their repertoire. But when it comes to like a Dan Severn or a Matt Hughes, they absolutely could have ruled today's UFC, in my opinion. I mean, he was fighting 3 and 4 nights or 3 or 4 fights a night. They don't do that anymore either.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if it had happened today, he would have been recruited right out of the University of Arizona. He wouldn't have even been a pro wrestler. He would have
Yeah.
gone straight to MMA and had proper training camps. So that's unfair. But I'll just say, as a fan, I like the old UFC way better. I know it
Yeah.
makes more money now than ever, but it's just I liked before where it was like one discipline against another rather than everybody is trained the same, and you really saw everyone thought karate people were the toughest. I remember,
Yeah.
don't fight him. He knows karate, and it would never be like watch out for this amateur wrestler guy. Now karate is a joke. I guess Cobra Kai or whatever may have brought it back a bit, but like you mentioned it in the Matt Hughes episode. Like
Yeah, dude.
Taekwondo, we used to think that could actually do something, but I mean, well, it's better than no knowledge. Like how many Taekwondo guys have done well?
Well, we go back to the 80s, 90s, you know, back in that style of pro wrestling. But when you go to our entertainment and fighting, it was the Jean-Claude Van Dammes, it was the Steven Seagals, the Chuck Norrises, which I know Chuck was legit. But you know, when UFC came out and you see somebody like Hoist Gracie taking down this big guy and all these different styles that are going on, it's like, man, this is nothing like Bloodsport was. This is nothing like the movies that I've been believing. And I believe that discredited the only fighter that I remember that used karate properly and really went anywhere with it was Lyoto Machida. Outside of that, I know George St. Pierre as well, but George St. Pierre knew a little bit of everything when it was predominantly just karate. I think Lyoto is about the only one that comes to mind.
Yeah, George St. Pierre. I mean, I used to train at the Montreal Wrestling Club in amateur wrestling when I did my little amateur wrestling comeback 2011, 2012, and he was training there. So
Mm.
he was training with like national team caliber wrestlers, even though he may not have had the strongest wrestling background. I think at one point he was even considering trying to wrestle for Canada, but obviously that would have been a big pay cut.
Dude, one of the best ever step in the octagon. What a
It
beast.
seems one of the problems today with UFC. I mean, Canada had George St. Pierre, and we all loved him. Now there's really no one has come close to matching his popularity. McGregor is probably the biggest draw UFC has right now, but he's at the end of his career. John Jones isn't anywhere near McGregor's level, and he only has a few fights left. I mean, there doesn't seem to be as many stars as there used to be. It's more people are going to see the product, but like it doesn't have the appeal that it had like 10 years ago.
Like, man, not trying to crap on the guy because I hope he's one of my future interviews for sure. But Dana White, I've been listening to Conor McGregor talk about how he's been begging for fights, and it's, you know, he just keeps getting the cold shoulder, and people think it's Conor backing out. I don't know what to believe because I mean, Conor has shown, and they had that documentary that come out. Like, you can't go 3 years, 2 and 3 years in between each fight and expect to be at that same caliber when you're going into these championship matches. It's just not possible, man. I guess John Jones does it, but he's a freak. And I mean, and Connor is too, man. Connor's great. I don't know if you guys have seen Roadhouse. I thought he did an amazing job in that to be his first time acting because he's always had that it factor. I would love to see Connor, even though this would be a massive pay cut for him. Maybe not. They could afford him. I'd love to see Connor in pro wrestling. Could you imagine that?
Yes, and he said he doesn't want to, but he would definitely do great in it. He might be too arrogant for pro wrestling to sell for people. I really don't know, but he would definitely do great. I would love to see Dana White do something. That would be pretty damn cool too.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm wondering how much longer Dana is going to be in the game now. I mean, it's, you know, UFC's what, turning 30? It turned 30 years old this year, I believe.
I've heard him say in interviews he loves it and he'll do it as long as he can. It's not about money. He's already so rich. It's just passion. He loves doing what he does.
I could see that though, man. I mean, like if I was, pro wrestling, MMA, I love that. If I had a job and I was making the money that Dana was, I'd never want to quit either. 31. Got you, Sean. Yeah, I know it's been going for a while, man. We used to have to rent this in the rated R section, kind of over near the porn. You had to get the UFC matches. That was about the only way you could see them because they was promoting it like the real life blood sport, the real life kumite.
Yeah, and it was banned from pay-per-view. I remember renting it for the first time, and it was a video Dan was in. I almost felt like I was so bad to just be renting it because it had that terrible connotation to it.
How did you feel watching that for the first time, though? You've seen pro wrestling, you've seen the action movies. Was it as big of a shock to you to watch the real thing as it was for me?
I was kind of taken. It was way more violent back then, and I was kind of taken back by how violent it was. I was kind of more watching it. Well, I had been in martial arts, and I was an amateur wrestler at the time, so I was interested in it. But it was a side. It was like there's something that you almost felt like this shouldn't be allowed as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a different era for sure, man. It blew my mind watching Hoist, win those first couple of championships. It was like, really?
The characters were so cool back then too. You had Chemo and like all
Yeah.
these Tank Abbott, all these guys that like they were just. It was like the wrestlers from the 80s and 90s. They were just like so much more interesting in real life than now. Like the fighters, a lot of the time they seem boring. It's like all we do is train.
Did
Like
you
it's
ever
not
see the
like
fight between Chemo and Bam Bam Bigelow?
yes,
What
and
do
I
you think?
actually interviewed Chemo about it.
Oh, okay. Bam Bam said it was fake. It was all a work, and he got paid well.
Yeah, chemo vehemently denied that it was work, and he
I
brought
believe
up that
Chemo.
I believe chemo too, and I believe also that Bigelow had a lot of issues at that time that have been well documented, and he probably did little to no training for it.
Was that back during like when he was on the painkillers and everything?
Yeah,
Okay,
and I
that makes
I
sense.
can't remember. It was either Rick Bassman or Sonny Ono that arranged that. One of the two, and they told me too. It was also not a work.
No, you could tell it wasn't a work, man. I mean, they would have made Bam Bam look a little bit stronger than that. That was incredibly one-sided.
And as chemo said, like you could see the lumps on his head after. But of course, it's good to say it was a work because some people are going to believe that.
That had to be very hard for somebody like Bam Bam after all those years being, in WWF and WrestleManias. And now you find yourself in the cage and you're not on national TV anymore. I don't know how these guys, and a lot of them don't save their money. It's got to be a pretty sad existence once the spotlight's gone away.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of those guys developed issues, and some of them still have to wrestle. Like we see the Rock and Roll Express still wrestling. How old are they?
Ooh, they're pretty, you know what they're doing, Ricky? They can get with it, man. I mean, I used to do this convention, and it was another place I saw Dan. It would go on in Tennessee every year called Hazard Fest, where the Dukes of Hazard guys would be there, but it was all the old pro wrestlers. And Ricky and the Rock and Roll Express, man, every single time they were one of the first ones there. That guy is always on cloud nine, ready to go. And I watched him get in the ring. Man, there's a lot of people that never need to step in the ring again. But if you're still getting around and doing like they're doing, I mean, who am I to say anything? Those guys are, they're a rare breed for sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story about Atlanta and the Dukes of Hazzard. We don't really learn American history that much here in Canada. And in Georgia, I bought like a hat with the Confederate flag on it, thinking, oh, this is the Dukes of Hazzard flag. And I'm wearing it for like 2 weeks, and I'm getting all this hate. And finally, someone explains to me, and this whole time I'm thinking, this is just the Dukes of Hazzard's flag, but there's a whole negative history to it. Of course, I'd seen the Freebirds wear it and stuff. I just didn't know.
Man, if you didn't grow up around that, like here in the South, that was just a way of life. It was everywhere. We never wore it as a sign of slavery or the Confederacy or anything like that. I mean, we referred to it as the rebel flag. And it was more for like the rebels, the ones that didn't want to, you know, just comply with whatever. And so at, some point, the past, 15, 20 years is when it really seemed to be hitting that point to where I don't even think the Dukes of Hazzard is on TV anymore, and it's all because of the flag, and that's such a shame because it was a great family show, and even at those events, it's some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And there's a lot of the General Lees going around with the rebel flags, but none of them are racist or anything like that. But I don't know. I can understand how some people might think so if they didn't grow up around it.
It seems like, and I'm not saying this is in the same category, but people have lost their sense of humor about things.
Oh yeah.
Like, for instance, I heard people have, for this Takashita guy in AEW, people have been chanting "take a shit," and like people are saying, "Oh, that's racist." It's like people are not saying that to be racist. They're saying it because he's the heel, and his name sounds like that. I mean, just lighten up a bit. I mean, it has nothing to do with anything but that.
All right, I'm going to sound like a complete idiot here, but I got to ask, why is saying "take a shit" racist for this guy? Because I've never seen it.
Because his last name is Takashita.
Aha. Okay.
Yeah, so it's like the fans are just making fun of his last name. He's a heel. Like I don't really think that has like anything to do with like hate for Japanese people. Even Rhea Ripley, I saw her on Logan Paul's podcast saying that the heel wrestlers, when they're outside of the wrestling ring, they should not be booed or harassed on social media because they're people too. It's like lighten up a bit. You're a heel. It's wrestling. Like what? How would you have lasted in the days where you had to deal with fan attacks?
There's no way, man. I mean, it's a crazy world we live in. But yeah, so I can see that. As a guy, man, I got some friends. I'd take a bullet for them, man, and I'd be there for them in a heartbeat. And if they're not like picking at me and not calling me names and stuff, I think something's wrong. I think I'd have made them mad. That was just like a term of endearment for a lot of us guys, and in pro wrestling, you were supposed to take shots at the heels and stuff like that. It's always been that way. People take everything too serious now.
Yeah, now there's rules. I mean, and especially in wrestling, the line is blurred. If you're a heel, people think of wrestlers for good or bad, they're like that all the time. But like, give me a break. You should be more respectful and not boo the person or say anything negative on social media if they're outside of an actual ring. And you should not say they're a bad wrestler because you might hurt their feeling. I forget even who she was talking about, but somebody had yelled at this girl on her way back from the ring because she wasn't that skilled. I think one of the American models or whatever that group was called that they've now made a wrestler. She was a manager, and somebody yelled that she was a horrible wrestler and she could quit on her way back from the ring. And this really hurt her feelings. And people should be more respectful. It's like, as a heel, you should love that. And this woman is a heel. Like, I think her name might be Dupree or something, or Maximum Male Models. Okay. But like, this is really we're wrestlers, and when in the 80s they were like supposed to be like superhuman, mythical people, the toughest ever, and now we got to watch to not hurt their feelings. It's like,
do you think the Iron Sheik could have happened nowadays?
No,
there's no way. No, did you ever interview him?
I got some footage with him, but his agents didn't allow me to interview him because they were putting out a movie and they didn't want any competition.
Oh, okay.
With their movie, his agents that ran his Twitter were assholes in my experience with him. One of the interviews from Unleashed TV that I really liked was the Matt Hughes one that you guys just did. I didn't even know he had a brain injury.
Oh, you didn't?
No. But for anyone that doesn't know, he was in an accident with a train. And he has a severe brain injury. And what I liked is he still did the show. A lot of people despite like the disability that they have, wouldn't even consider doing that. I like that he's not just sitting at home on disability. He's working
Oh yeah,
and
dude.
he's doing shows.
He takes the jobs that nobody else wants to do. That's Matt Hughes. So the first time I met Dan was actually because I went to interview Matt. I went up to Michigan. They had a documentary that was coming out, and I knew Matt had went through a pretty nasty divorce. And he was getting accused of hitting his wife and all kinds of stuff, man. And I know for these guys, especially if you've been in the UFC, because you're a trained fighter, if somebody makes an allegation against you, people are going to treat you like you're guilty. And, I knew Matt couldn't speak that well, but I was talking to his manager and he wanted to do the interview. So we did. And while I was up there, that was when I met Dan. But just seeing Matt and the courage that he has, I mean, the jobs, literally, it doesn't matter if it's pumping out a septic tank or getting your hands down in piles of shit or whatever. Like he's a country boy, and what you see is what you get. He could care less if anybody likes him or if anybody's cheering for him or anything. He just wants to be a normal guy, and he keeps getting better and better. He was so much better this time than the last time I talked to him. And you're 100% right. A lot of people would probably tuck their head in between, their legs and go on and say, I'm just not going to give any more interviews. That's not Matt for you, man. He's definitely an inspiration.
Yeah, unfortunately, when a guy has accusations against them, like I had some on me, everybody reports them, even
Oh
though
yeah.
they were found to be completely false. And the person that made the accusation was found guilty of 3 charges. And it was purely self-defense because I was being attacked with a weapon and I had no other choice. Nobody reported when I was cleared and found not guilty
No.
and the charges were baseless. But when it happened, it made all the news and nobody retracts it. It's one of the unfortunate situations about being public.
All by design too, man. I mean, all they need is an allegation to make you go on the defensive. You're looked at, in this country, we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. You're looked at as guilty until proven innocent. And we're seeing this going on, not trying to say the guy is innocent by no means. Like an hour before I got on here, I got to see one of the letters that Janelle Grant had wrote to Vince McMahon, one of her love letters. And I'm sitting there reading this, and it was like, this doesn't seem like a girl that's disgruntled about getting a turd on her head, if you ask me. It sounds like somebody that was really enjoying this relationship. And the problem is, you just don't know. You need to present hard evidence. I mean, this is a billionaire we're talking about here. Would somebody sue a billionaire for money? Yeah, they'll sue. And if you got money, they will sue you. You rarely see, Hannibal, somebody that doesn't have money getting these accusations made on them from 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I didn't know that you had went through that, but I feel for you, man, because this is something that is completely out of hand. It's rampant, and the media loves to report every little bump on the way down, every one of those allegations. And you know what? There needs to start being some lawsuits against these people that report this crap, because even if you can prove your innocence, a lot of times that's going to be a stain on your career, and people are always going to look back towards that. It's sick, man. It really is.
100%. Now, just before we went on, I just came from the gym before we did this interview. I had only briefly glanced at that Janelle Grant love letter to Vince. Could you share that story and that news with us?
Yeah, man. So it's the New York Post posted this letter that they found that Janelle had wrote to Vince. Now, Janelle's attorney allegedly is saying Vince forced her to write this letter. Okay. And that was something that he had planned, but then it showed text messages back and forth between Vince and her. It seems like the relationship was consensual and she was enjoying it up until it got to that point. We'll never know, man. I mean, you had all that time to say something about that. And well, let's play devil's advocate here. Would you be scared about this billionaire that's always gotten out of every single one of these lawsuits, even no matter like how crazy the story is? Probably. I can imagine her being a little intimidated by that, but I think she could have got out way sooner. And if you read that letter, I don't want to make up anybody's mind for him or even try to influence you. Read it and see how you feel. To me, it sounds like a woman that was in a relationship and then they broke up. And now she's saying, hey, I mean, let's go back to this, dude. She was going to settle with the guy for $3 million. He only paid her $1 million. And then that's when this lawsuit came back up and these allegations started going. If it wasn't about money, I mean, anyway.
The fact of the matter is she didn't pursue criminal charges, which I mean, I think the statute of limitations is up now, but when she initially filed the civil suit, why didn't she file the criminal suit or
Yeah.
the criminal charges, have him arrested?
Well, they said one of the things that you really got to watch out for is when they go to the courts instead of the police department. If they skip over the police department and they go straight to lawsuit, anyway.
And I'm not saying that Vince doesn't have a weird side, and those
No.
text messages are weird. I can't imagine anyone sober. I could see somebody drunk writing that kind of stuff, but he doesn't have that reputation. But to be sober, writing that kind of like it's actually borderline homosexual type stuff to a woman, it's a little bizarre. But 100% she accepted a ton of gifts. She accepted a job. I don't know. I guess we'll see if it goes to civil trial, what comes out of it.
I think you see a lot of these cases, dude, where like these women act in these ways, and then the next day it was like, oh my God, what did I do? They raped me. I'm not saying that's every single case, and there would be people that would try to twist my words with that. That's not what I'm doing. But does that type of stuff happen all the time? And when you've got money, you've really got a target on your back. I hate to say this, but you almost need a contract before you sleep with somebody now. You slept with me on this night, and it was consensual. And we're just doing that, to make sure if it's really, this way. It's almost like a prenup before you have any relations. I mean, we're kind of in that world right now. Definitely not saying Vince McMahon is innocent by no means. I know he's got a very checkered past, but this one kind of sent off red flags with me from the very beginning, because I have to deal with this stuff all the time, man. It's going crazy.
The one thing that I find bizarre to this is they keep acting like she was destitute. They lived in the same building as Vince, a multi-millionaire.
I caught that.
Like, how could you possibly have no money living in a building where the billionaire is in the building?
I mean, I know, Elon Musk is a billionaire too, and he's got a boxable home, but I don't see that scenario with Vince McMahon. I'm sure he lives somewhere pretty nice. I would think so anyway.
Oh, 100%. Now, as far as your show, where can they subscribe to the show? Where can they watch it? What guests do you have coming up, and what guests have you done?
Tomorrow we are interviewing, I know Missy Hyatt is coming up. I've had Tony Gurria, Les Thatcher, and guys, we got some pretty big stuff coming up. It's just, but juggling the schedules right now to make these happen. We were planning on doing a bunch of interviews and then releasing it, 1 month in. So we had a bunch built up, and then Butterbean was our first guest, and his son was fighting that Friday. So we jumped on the show very quickly, and I didn't get to put the promotion behind it that I initially wanted, which was okay. You got to get your, feet wet and start this thing. If you go to Unleashed TV on YouTube, I'm trying to do podcasts every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I will be doing, different clips and stuff like that. We're going to have some more than just pro wrestling. There's going to be some MMA. And I know there's some other things that Dan's wanting to talk about as well. But it seems to be taking off. I'm sure, for anybody that's done a YouTube channel before, it starts off slow and it takes a while to build up momentum. But I think with what we've got going on, I mean, not trying to be biased, I think we've got a really good product, and I think you guys would enjoy listening to it. So please subscribe and come check out what we're doing.
Yeah, and I'm not the type that would put it over or put clips on this channel if I didn't think highly of the product, but it seems like it has a lot of potential. And if you like the Dan and Dawn podcast, I mean, this is another side of Dan, but I think there's better questions for guests on this podcast than the Dan and Dawn. And I'm not taking anything away from that one. It's just you'll know more about the guests in an interview with Dan on this channel.
Well, so that was one of the things that Kevin's daughter told me he liked about the interview. She liked with the interview with Kevin. I've listened to just about every interview you can imagine on Kevin Von Erich's done, or the Von Erich brothers. I'd heard them all. And I was watching a couple of podcasts that have been done in like the last month with Kevin. And I was like, dude, I've heard these questions 1,000 times. What I want to know is, how did you feel about that portrayal of Fritz? What was that like behind the scenes? What was that relationship, like with your wife? I'm going to talk to you about the people that I know mean a lot to you, rather than sit here and ask you the questions about the tragedies over and over and over. Now, I made sure to ask about Carrie's foot, because I don't know if you guys saw the movie. They made it like, his foot was cut off this much. It was like way, way above the ankle. And I knew it wasn't like that. He still had a heel. He just didn't have the front part of his foot. But I did more personal things, because I mean, let's be honest with this, dude. Kevin lost 5 of his brothers. Not only that, he lost his mom and his dad, whom he loved very much. You're in the public spotlight. All of this is going on. What was that like for this guy? And that's not all. David had a daughter, a little girl that died as well, that nobody ever seems to report on, which that wasn't in the interview. But another thing I found out was, at one point, Kevin had an accident where he ran over his daughter. It was like when cell phones had first came out. She wasn't hurt, but she had tire marks all the way across her, and then went to the hospital. That was one of the stories they told us the other night. And they said Kevin was just so shook up, he couldn't even get out of the car, because he knew what had just happened. It happened like that quick. And I was like, dude, I've never heard that before. The things that this guy went through, and for him to continue to get out here and to inspire these fans. And man, I mean, like, so because he was at a Ticketmaster outlet or venue that night, when the show was over, I was supposed to meet him that night. They made everybody leave. And man, I drove 13 hours to meet the guy. I'm not going to lie, when I was leaving, I was a little bummed out. But man, next thing I know, I got a text from his daughter and him. Next thing, and then I got a text from him, and I got to go meet him the next morning. He wanted to make sure to talk to us and take a picture and everything. Man, dude, I've never seen anybody treat their fans with the respect like that guy. And it goes a long, long way for me.
Yeah, and his kids, Marshall and Ross, seem to be very much the same way. I hope that I can't understand how they are not pushed by AEW or WWE, unless for some reason they don't want to sign. But it seems like, why the hell wouldn't they be signed with all the people that each company have on their roster with so much less potential than them?
So I do believe, if I'm not wrong, at one point in time, Ross and Marshall was very close to doing the NXT deal. And then they backed out of it. I know, it was one of the questions I asked Kevin, why didn't you ever go in WWE? He said he loved his family more. Ross and Marshall's, they've got family, and they know if they go and do that WWE life, it's going to be road nonstop. And a lot of the guys don't want schedules like that. I know they've done a couple of hits over at AEW. I'm very curious to see if that's going to become more full-time, especially now since they moved back to Dallas. The Dallas area, to get more involved. So I would not be shocked to see the Von Erichs pop up and become more mainstream. But I mean, even over the past 10 years, I'm like you, man, I thought it would have been one of the biggest things out there, because again, Texas still loves their Von Erichs, and many other places do too. So.
And apparently MLW had them under contract for like almost a year and didn't even use them, and just held them under contract, which is just
ludicrous.
I don't get it. Anyways, it's been very interesting, and I'll let you shut it down with whatever you want to tell the fans. Highly suggest you guys go over to Unleash TV and help support the podcast, because it seems to have a lot of potential.
Man, I appreciate the opportunity and for trying to help us get this out there. Look, guys, I am nothing special. I'm just a wrestling fan getting to live out his dream right now with Dan the Beast Severn and the guests that are coming on. I was like a little kid each time I get to do this, and I'm enjoying it. And I promise you, if you come over there, you subscribe, you like, you comment, we are going to continue doing these podcasts, and I'm going to ask questions that you aren't hearing anywhere else. That's my plan. So hopefully you can come over there, we can learn together, and we can entertain you, and I hope to see you there.